Well, I'm just delighted that my wife, Mary Elizabeth, was here for that introduction. She refuses to come to court and watch me because she will not stand when I enter the room. And sometimes I tell people in the courtroom that I've never heard "all rise" when I go home. I hear mostly "pick up your socks and clean the dishes." Didn't anticipate the lights, and I can't see you as well as I hoped, which may be better for me. I'm delighted to be with you and somewhat see you as together we level up. I begin with an illustration, a visual illustration. It might be uncomfortable for you introverts in the room, but stay with me. We'll get through this together. I hope to make a point after this visual illustration. It's unusual, but Mr. Carl Barney is present. He is the founder, the donor of the Prometheus Foundation. He's joined by his lovely companion, Julie, my dear friend. And I ask Carl and Julie, just please stand if you would. Thank you. No. If you'll remain standing. Now, sigh of relief. I wasn't sure if Mr. Barney was actually going to do what I requested. Thank you. Mary Elizabeth, if you'll please stand. Thank you. No, please. Although she certainly deserves it, but not just yet. And members, let's see, Craig is here. I don't know if Sarah is here. They are the brains, the operators, the leaders of OSI, who sponsors this conference. Craig and Sarah, if you're here, stand, if you would, please, wherever you are in place. Members of the board, there's Craig. Members of the board, the Prometheus Foundation, Lenny, if you'll stand. Wolf, join and stand, please. Other members of the OSI organization, if you'll stand. Anybody? All right, now to the rest of you, don't be shy. Join these remarkable leaders. Would everybody in the room stand, please? Just stand for a moment. Thank you. I'm going to ask 8 questions. I want you to answer those questions to yourself, quietly. Remain standing regardless of your answer. And I need my glasses. Have you survived the death of somebody you love? Don't answer, except to yourself. Have you experienced a deep, unexpected loss of a relationship, of your health, of an education or career goal? These are yes or no answers. Have you experienced physical trauma or disability? Have you experienced poverty or financial crisis? Have you been treated unjustly by a parent, other relative, a friend, a mentor, a coworker, or an employer? Do you have misgivings or sadness about the family you were born into? Do you know anybody who would answer yes to any of those questions? And finally, do you believe that at some point in your life you will answer yes to any of those questions? Now, obviously, I've constructed this because I hope that when I invite everybody who has a yes answer to please sit down. I'm looking for anybody who has a perfect life. I want to meet you. Seeing nobody. My point, as you can glean from this illustration, is that everybody who lives will experience some form of traumatic event or adversity that disrupts perspectives and challenges core beliefs. Every one of us. And the question I examine in the next 50 minutes is whether you will be defined by the worst circumstances in your life, or whether those circumstances will be the catalyst for your productive, happy, flourishing lives. My answer is that we are not enslaved to our circumstances, whether of our own creation or caused by somebody else. Life is difficult. It is sad. Its events are unexpected. But I pose to you my truth, which is, despite the difficulty, despite the sadness, we remain the architects of our own lives. Deep trauma, I use the word trauma, I want it to be hand in hand with adversity. It's something more than disappointment. The United States Supreme Court said when defining pornography, I can't define it with words, but you know it when you see it. And that's the way I present the idea of deep trauma or adversity, something that causes a disability, something that leads to loss of sleep, anxiety, depression, a decline in physical health, lost interest in hobbies, maybe even lost interest in life. That level of trauma-induced disability can overtake our minds. It can persist. It can cause some to just drift subconsciously through life. Some evade it. They construct a false reality of what they want to be. In so doing, they stop living, though they remain alive. Everybody who experiences this level of trauma or disability has four fundamental questions. Four fundamental options. Just surrender. Be its victim and drift for the duration of your life. You might endure life, but with a diminished capacity to live. Improving as the options unfold, we may touch resilience where we return to our condition before the traumatic event. And then is the gold standard. We might thrive. Thriving is different than resiliency. Thriving is returning not to the baseline of our pre-traumatic lives, but to an increase in what we enjoyed before that trauma. For the past several decades, psychological research, social study research has focused on the impacts of trauma, that trauma defines us, that it limits us. And I don't quarrel with the phenomenon of PTSD. I believe it to be real. I believe that some have psychological impairments that require professional help, even psychotropic interventions. Each of us, in some way, have organic, environmental, and other external influences that cause real impairment. In fact, my own daughter is a graduate-degreed social worker. She works within this space. Nothing I say today is intended to diminish that phenomenon. I just believe that it's not yet complete. I observe the human dynamic every week in my career. People are brought to me for my criminal cases. People are brought to me in custody. They kind of tumble into court from a bad place. They stand in a bad place on their way to a bad place. Tuesday, before I flew to Atlanta, I had many people on my criminal calendar, and I just think of two now. One was a 72-year-old man. First criminal offense. Within an hour of receiving his divorce papers, he went to the gun safe. I'm talking about his intentional acts. He went to the gun safe. He retrieved his shotgun. He loaded the shotgun with 5 shells. He found his car keys. He drove to where his soon-to-be ex-wife was. He drove through 3 intersections, each giving him an opportunity to pause, to reflect, to redirect. He approached the front door where she was and didn't knock. Instead, he started shooting through the deadbolt of the door handle. Shot completely through the door, gained access to the home, and began shooting at her. She fled through a back window. A few pellets got her, but she fled, ran up the street barefoot, hid in the bushes, while he slowly drove up and down the streets, presumably to find her. He stood before me, pleading for probation. His 2 parents, still alive, were in their 90s. He didn't want to spend what would effectively be the rest of his life in prison, and he certainly wanted a chance to live with his parents in the last season of their lives. That's an example of the type of cases that I see. Also on Tuesday, I had a gentleman who worked inside the cash vault at one of our casinos. He stole $250,000 of cash and had gambled it all within 6 months. I see these otherwise good people. I say good people. I want to believe that within each of us is something positive, though our choices, their choices, are less than positive. They have endless explanations for their circumstances, but they rarely acknowledge the roles of reason, of choice, and of consequence. They abdicate their own lives to others or to the conduct they choose not to change. Now, I receive a report about every person that I sentence. These reports tell me about the defendant's childhood, family, education, employment, criminal history, facts of the offense. I've read thousands in the past 19 years. And woven through each report are the threads of trauma and adversity. On the day I prepared these remarks, I just cut and pasted one. It's emblematic of the many that I have read. Now, I present it to you not to read as a verbatim word for word. The slide is dense, but just as a visual representation of what I read. I'm going to summarize a portion of this defendant's story. She was the oldest child of 3. She felt that for most of her young life, she was responsible to care for her 2 siblings and her mother. She described her mother as a shut-in bipolar manic with alcohol and drug abuse. She reported many abusive childhood events. She reported lots of trauma in her childhood. She was physically and verbally abused. She was struck. She was pulled. She was locked in. Her mother was incarcerated when she was young. Then, when the defendant was 16 years of age, her mother died in her presence. She attempted to resuscitate her mother, but her mother was already gone. That led her to her grandparents' home. The first penis she ever saw in life was her grandfather's. Her grandmother wanted her to sleep with her grandmother because her grandfather was, I'm finding it, a pervert and an alcoholic. She was sexually abused by her cousin. She was kicked out of school. She tumbled into her own adult abusive relationships. One of her partners went to jail 3 different times for violence. One time, he put a power drill in her head. Those are the types of traumatic events that permeate our communities and that lurk somewhere below the surface in many, many lives. But despite this human experience, despite the features of post-traumatic stress disorder, I also believe that trauma can be transformative. We are not predestined to surrender to our trauma. Those who experience trauma can thrive, and there's a new field of study entitled post-traumatic growth, in contrast to post-traumatic stress disorder. The questions of post-traumatic growth are not what happened or why it happened, but instead, what shall we do after it happens? And the social science research reveals that those who emerge with post-traumatic growth experience increased personal strength, a deeper ability to relate to others, openness to new possibilities, a greater appreciation for life, and spiritual or existential change. But post-traumatic growth does not occur organically. It's available to those who accept reality and who use the reasoning power of their own minds to wrestle with how do we live after trauma. It requires focused consciousness and effort. I think of my mind as an oversized pencil. I'm old enough to have had pencils in school. I had an eraser on one end. Well, the pencil in my mind, it's lost its eraser. But on the other end of that pencil is the lead that we can use and resharpen time and again. Lead that I can use to write my own story. A story that's created through the power of my mind and through my own self-directed actions. Which leads to my story, our story. It's personal. This is the first time I've shared it publicly. I'm concerned. I'd rather talk less and listen more. I'm concerned that I might become a character in the story. I don't want that. But I do want my story to be the subject of my remarks. So please forgive me if some of what I say might sound immodest. That is not my intention. This is my story. It's not your story. Yours will be different. Your causes will be different. Your responses will be different. The critical cohesion is that you also have a story that you write when these events arrive in your lives. My life story began with unearned privilege. I was born into a wonderful family, a family of love, warmth, and protection. For a variety of reasons, including financial, I chose to join the Army right out of high school. Spent a few years in the Army. And then my life became richer in 1986 when I married my teenage girlfriend, Mary Elizabeth. Together, we raised 3 wonderful daughters. We created our own Camelot. A Camelot with love, with money, with health, with careers, with prestige, satisfaction. We earned and we deserved the privileges that we created together. Our oldest daughter, Elisa, finished her graduate degree in 2014. Her husband deferred his medical school education while she finished her graduate degree, and upon her completion, they moved back home so that he could begin his own education. At that time, they had my oldest grandchild, Emmeline. We saw Elisa every day. In fact, we subsidized Elisa and her family to live on our same street. Elisa and Mary Elizabeth taught in adjacent schools that shared the same campus. She was excited to welcome the second child into our family. Now, I'm more than a little biased, but I think Elisa was almost perfect. As a child, she was almost perfect, and then as an adult, she became not just my child, but my friend. Now, that is my biased recollection, but I know that that perception was shared by many people. Elisa had the gift of connection. When people left their interactions with her, they felt seen and heard. Many people left their interactions with Elisa and thought they were her best friend. I can't tell you the number of people who told me Elisa was my best friend. Now, it is objectively true that today there are 6 little girls born to Elisa's friends who each bear the name Elisa. What a tribute to my daughter. That she would mean something so honorable that her friends would convey her name. I have a grandson named Asher. Now, Lisa was Elisa Suzanne Hardy, and we often refer to her as Ash, which is the origins of our grandson's name, Asher. There's 7 children today, and maybe more in the future, although I don't know. 7 children who thought the same about our daughter, Elisa. Also in 2014, I had just completed my 3rd graduate degree, this time a PhD. I was being groomed for another judicial office, either the federal bench or an appellate court. Mary Elizabeth and I were building a McMansion, delighted in its design and construction. Elisa was fluent in Spanish. Every Friday, we'd go to the job site. I'd give pizza and beer to the workers. Elisa would talk to them in Spanish, translate for me as I thanked them and acknowledged their hard work. We didn't just design and build our own home. Elisa worked with our same architect and designed the home right next door. We share the same driveway. It was first to be used by my parents, and then after they were gone, by Elisa and her family. Elisa designed that home so that when she or her husband Taylor stood at the kitchen sink, they could look through the window directly into our garage to know if we were home or not. Life was perfect. And then it wasn't. On August 6th of 2016, Elisa was killed by a drunk driver less than a half mile from our home. She was on her way to retrieve a friend at the airport, a friend that was visiting for the weekend. Parenthetically, that friend is one of the mothers who named her daughter Elisa. She was more than 8 months pregnant at the time, and her unborn child did not survive. Elisa kissed her 2.5-year-old daughter, Emmeline, to bed, and when Emmeline awakened the next morning, her mother was gone. Our lives were shattered. The tragedy was picked up by the national news. It penetrated our community's consciousness. 1,700 people attended Elisa's memorial service. Then I and dear friends carried her casket. We put it in its final resting place in the cemetery. I left that cemetery feeling I had buried myself. I didn't want to live with the pain that I experienced. I've never returned to the cemetery. Neither Mary Elizabeth nor I could focus after the tragedy. A fog of grief blurred our vision. We stopped living and just began existing. We were neither lovable as nouns nor loving as verbs. We no longer cared about money, careers, a McMansion, help, family, friends, activities, toys. Mary Elizabeth in particular became reclusive, shutting the world out. We didn't watch television for a very long time. It all seemed so trivial compared to our loss. I didn't drive. I can't remember because of that fog, but certainly more than a month and maybe a few months. The pain, it was deep, it was dark, it was persistent, and it was disabling. Mary Elizabeth resigned her teaching position so she could be a stay-at-home grandmother to a 2.5-year-old motherless granddaughter. I returned to work after several months, but was a shell of my former self. Many colleagues wondered if I could continue in my position. My heroic mother-in-law stood at the funeral pulpit and eulogized Elisa. She then went home, sat down, and was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Her illness and death 9 months later was a deepening spiral of our trauma-induced disability. A signal event occurred more than a year after Elisa's accident. A neighbor knocked on the door. Surprised, but Mary Elizabeth answered the door. She answered the door in her pajamas. And the neighbor looked at her and just said, "Oh, sweetie, you need to take a shower. You need to get dressed. You need to go to the doctor and get medicine." I keep this picture in my bedroom. It's large, it's framed, it's probably 2 by 3 feet. I don't look at that picture to define me. I look at that picture every day to inspire me to fill the void so that I am more than a solitary figure with an empty soul. With help from others, we confronted a choice. Do we live again, or do we continue drifting until our own deaths? We made the conscious decision to accept our new reality, our new normal, to choose life. The connection between our reality and that choice, ultimately our belief that we could thrive after adversity, was the reasoning power of our own minds. Don't be deceived about the ease of post-traumatic growth. This is not a story ending with warm milk and warm cookies and cold milk. It was and it is hard. Some days are better than others. We miss Elisa every day. There's an empty chair every time we sit at the table. Emmeline yearns for the mother she cannot remember. And our precious Elisa will always be 28 years of age. After we made that choice to touch life again, we just tumbled through different attempts. We were led by emotion and intuition. Our grief journey was a concept without a design. And then with the help of a life coach that we met with weekly for more than a year, approaching a year and a half, we identified our purposes and we defined our life-serving values. Using those values and purpose, we then constructed the template, the design for our grief work so that we could create the lives we wished to live. I've said this several times, but work of the mind is difficult. We wrote expanded definitions of every value, not just the value, but the words within each value. We prioritized our values in relationship to each other. We rated how we were living those values. We identified what choices actuated those values and what choices repelled those values. We assigned a financial commitment to each value. I'm going to show you just a visual representation of the values, but our statement of values is more than 20 pages in length. I want to give you an idea. Now, these are our values, and I feel a little vulnerable sharing them with you. Yours will be different. You might even disagree with some of ours. Our number one value is to continually create our marriage. We want to live at peace, free of conflicts, living harmoniously and cooperatively with others. We want emotional, physical. We value emotional, physical, and spiritual health. We value wisdom, honesty, and integrity. We yearn for security, financial security, without fear for loss of resources. Leisure through luxury and travel emerged as a value for us. For me, that includes a variety and adventure. For Mary, that includes more non-scheduled time, personal time. I'm behind in my slides. We both want professional excellence as we continue to work. Friendships, solitude, and reflection are important to me. For Mary Elizabeth, order, beauty, cleanliness, and simplicity. And then after we began implementing the grief journey we designed, something else emerged for me, and that is the instructive influence of discomfort. I can't explain it. I've attempted to articulate it to myself as I thought about these remarks, but there's something powerful about discomfort for me. Our lives are engineered to avoid discomfort. We check the news, we communicate in real time with our phones, we order food, we adjust the temperature in our homes. Our showers are hot, our beds are soft, our modern lives are abundant. And in my case, that abundance is deceptive. For me, too much comfort interferes with the critical work of discerning reality and reasoning my way to long-term action. Discomfort allows me to focus on the power of self. I needed to do things that frightened me, that pushed me, that created a risk of failure. I wanted to find the inside edge of my outer boundary. I needed to disconnect and return to a simpler time when I alone was responsible for my life outcomes. So we did some things. In our mid-50s, slightly overweight, unfit boomers, we ran a 26-mile marathon. Now note the shirts. If I have time, I'll come back to them. But we ran this marathon together. We went to Spain. We walked 100 miles on the Way of St. James, which is a pilgrimage for suffering souls. I rode 50,000 miles on my motorcycle. Mary Elizabeth joined me for 20,000 miles. Together, we endured wind, rain, a hell of a hailstorm in South Dakota, as you may remember. Bears on the road in Alaska, feral pigs on the road in Texas, wind through the Rockies that tipped us over. And then I parked the motorcycle. I still needed more. So I asked myself, what do I enjoy most? It's very basic. I love a shower, a toilet, a menu, and a bed. How can I deprive myself of those things? I know. I'll hike the Appalachian Trail. So Mary Elizabeth and I started at the southern terminus of the trail, not far from here, Springer Mountain. We bought gear, didn't know how to use it, started walking. The first night was comical, right? It's dark, She has a flashlight, and I'm reading instructions on how to set up a tent. I had this brilliant idea for a first aid kit. Had 3 items in it. Some bandages, a couple of narcotic pills, and a summer sausage. Because I thought if I rolled down a ravine and had a compound fracture, I could take some pills, bandage the blood, and then sit and eat my summer sausage until someone came to get me. I didn't understand the weight of a backpack, and on the second day of our hike, I grabbed that damn summer sausage and I ripped off its coating. I didn't want to litter that, and I threw that biodegradable thing as far as I could. I probably saved 2 pounds for my backpack. Our time on the trail was difficult. Our days were defined by simple tasks: weather, drinking water, hanging our bear bags, avoiding snakes, finding secluded trees for those private moments of our day, conquering countless ups and downs, ascents and descents. We called them useless ups and downs. I have a short image to just illustrate the discomfort of the trail. This image was taken in the middle of a 3-day relentless rainstorm. We hiked in the rain, we slept in the rain, we toileted in the rain, we ate in the rain. Still smiling.
Wow.
Even now, wow. And the mountains revealed their beauty. We were inspired by many other hikers who were on journeys of their own hearts and minds. It was magical to disconnect from the electronic world, to connect to ourselves through lengthy, uninterrupted introspection. We developed a hiking pattern that allowed separation in our togetherness. We were always apart, a quarter to a half mile from each other, but then would connect every hour or so. And after 500 miles, as we penetrated into Virginia, we concluded the trail had taught us as much as it could about how we should live. We never intended to do the entire trail. It was a matter of time, and we learned our lessons. And Mary Elizabeth's knees were so horribly damaged that when we flew back, I had to get her in a wheelchair to get her off the airplane. She immediately went into double knee surgery. One of her knees was replaced. And her doctor, who was our friend, said, "You're done." And I said, "No, not yet. I have one more to do." So against medical advice and with a picture of Elisa in our pocket, we flew to Africa. At over 19,000 feet, Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest peak on the African continent. It represented the most difficult challenge within my abilities. It whispered to me during the day, it mocked me at night. I knew I had to confront Kilimanjaro. Those who have summited have the pleasure of referring to it as Kili. We summited Kili. After 7 days of gradually hiking to acclimate to the elevation, sleeping in a tent every night, I found the inside edge of my outer boundary. Breathless in that thin air, vomiting and confused from altitude sickness, I felt more alive than ever before. I designed my own actions, and I accomplished something I previously thought was impossible. So what are the lessons from our journey? Existence is, and my reasoning mind is the instrument for survival and happiness. Whoops. Reality is as it is, not what I want it to be. It is independent of my consciousness. We cannot evade reality Instead, we lean into it. We choose to act according to our purposes and values. Ayn Rand said of reality, it is absolute. The facts are facts regardless of anyone's hopes, fears, or desires. There's a world independent of our minds to which our thinking must correspond if our ideas are to be true and therefore of practical use in living our lives, pursuing our values, and protecting our rights. Living with conscious focus, as directed by our purposes and life-serving values, requires effort. It is not a cosmic gift. If I want to realize a value, I must enact the causes necessary to achieve that value. I strive to live every day as the person I want to become. We can do hard things. We never know what we can do until we have to do it. Many times during our adventures, when we wanted to quit, when it was just too much, we asked ourselves, what if Elisa was around the corner? What if she was on the top of that mountain? And each time, we found something within to cause us to continue. This idea that we can do hard things has become a theme in our value. On Sunday, Father's Day, my daughter Abigail presented a gift to me 4 days ago, long after I prepared these remarks. It's a children's book. She wants me to read to grandchildren. I can do hard things. This is a gentleman that we met on the trail. His trail name was Walks with Donor. There we go. I don't know his real name. He's a double lung transplant recipient with a shortened life expectancy. He carried far too much weight, but he couldn't be without his medicine and an extraordinary amount of water. He hiked just a fraction of the distance he wanted to every day. But he persevered. He refused to surrender to his shortened life expectancy. He refused to quit. Sometimes it's good to quit, by the way. But in this instance, he did not allow his circumstances to stop him from living. I keep this picture on the right framed in my office. Now, that apparition just ahead of the hiker, I presume, is his donor, faceless, anonymous donor. We don't have to believe in apparitions, but we can see influences and people in our lives that help us up our mountains. We met another gentleman. Ken was a military officer and then suffered a combat injury resulting in traumatic brain injury. He spoke, thought, and sounded like a child. Like our friend Walks with Donor, he simply began each day with awareness of his circumstances and with gratitude to be alive. Mary Elizabeth and Ken shot a short video to send home to our girls. One.
Hey girls, this is my new hiking buddy, Ken. He is a veteran and he's tough. The two of us can do hard things.
We can do hard things. All right. All the best. Bye.
I often think about how I would survive if I was dropped onto an uninhabited island. What would I do? I'd gather information, acquire as much knowledge as possible, and then I would sit and I would think. I would think about food sources, predators, weather, shelter, risk. And with that thinking, I would survive. But in life, we don't live alone on islands, but instead we interact with others in love, kindness, generosity, and spirit. We give and we receive in fair trade according to our values. The connection between us is powerful. Going back to those marathon shirts. We had Elisa's name on the back, and then under her name, ALISA, we had a word that represented what we thought of her. Always love, inspire, support, and accept. That marathon was 12 driving hours from our home. 75 of our friends and Elisa's friends joined us as runners in that marathon, most of whom were not runners and had never completed a marathon. One flew in from Australia. In addition to 75 runners, there were somewhere between 150 and 200 people on the sidelines wearing those exact same shirts. Mary Elizabeth and I started at the very front of the pack when the whistle went off because I knew we were going to finish at the end of the pack. And I wanted every single person who wore a shirt to pass me because I wanted to touch them. I wanted to speak to them. I wanted to acknowledge them. And as we ran past the spectators, shirt after shirt, a sea of turquoise shirts, this idea of trading in values, what we love and respect, is critical to my life. Also, each moment reflects a point in time. And long-range thinking puts those moments in context. I did 100 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is on the West Coast. I did it without Mary Elizabeth. And one evening it was cold. It was bitterly cold. So cold. And I awakened the next morning and I saw the sun. And I sent this picture to Carl Barney. The sun always rises, no matter how cold the night. This image has become the standard in my life. Remember that the moment now is not our future moments. Now, there are lots of resources, and I'm running out of time, but I believe deeply in rational philosophy. It's more than rhetorical fluff. Philosophy examines the more important questions in life. It opens our minds and causes us to think deeply about how we should live. I commend to you Objectivism, Stoicism, Leonard Peikoff's courses on the history of Western philosophy. Some might resonate with positive psychology or cognitive behavioral therapies. I believe in coaching. Not everyone can afford a coach, but talking through ideas, questions, answers can be a powerful tool. Now, I began with an illustration, a visual illustration of how tragedy, adversity is part of the human condition. I approached the end of my remarks with a challenge that reveals the power of our minds. This is my takeaway. It is my call to action. I wear a colored lanyard. I don't have permission from Level Up to create a Level Up Chili Challenge. But I'm wearing this colored lanyard because this morning I chose to do something that placed my mind at the front of the day. At the end of my shower, I turned the water as cold as it could go. It wasn't that cold, actually. I feared it much worse than its reality. But I turned that shower as cold as it could go and stood under it for 60 seconds. I earned the right to wear this lanyard. It was today's victory over comfort and complacency. And I challenge you to do the same thing. When you shower tonight or tomorrow morning, turn that water to cold. I have several lanyards with me here. Take one. Take one and wear it tomorrow. Pass me. Introduce yourself to me. We will have the Orange Chili Challenge lanyard between us. And take that lanyard home if you choose to accept one. Put it in a prominent place. where you can have a visual reminder that your mind is your sharpest tool. Collectively, our minds compose the strongest power on earth. Our minds control our actions, our lives, and our happiness. Now, the Hardys remain sad. Sometimes the sadness is overwhelming. Sometimes it arrives at its own convenient time. Sometimes that sadness evolves to anger. What do I do with those emotions? I recognize them, I sit with them, I allow them in until I'm ready to gently set them aside. There is power in our emotions as long as we recognize them as a response and not a fact of reality. I strive not to act on emotion, which is difficult for me. It will be the work of my life. I'm an emotional person. Brad Thompson is a professor at Clemson. He's on the board, and he blogs, and he wrote about the power of emotions. And he writes, quoting John Adams, "The experience of grief is necessary to essential moral development. The same is true of emotions. Understanding the nature and meaning of emotions such as joy, anger, shame, fear, and wonder help us to better understand the human condition. To experience and reflect upon these emotions," Adams wrote, "prompts us into serious reflection. It sharpens our understanding and softens the heart. It teaches us patience and compassion. Don't be afraid of your emotions. Recognize them for what they are. Allow them to be a tool in your transformation. Traumatic events are like economic sunk costs. There is no refund. We can never return to our pre-trauma lives. But with that cost permanently paid, we can look to the future with a catalog of experiences and experiential wisdom. Rather than having one eye always look back, we can be two eyes on our futures. Today, my life is more valuable to me than it was. I like myself better. My relationships are richer and more meaningful. Despite episodic sadness, I am capable and I am worthy of profound happiness." Carl Barney sent a quote to me from a lawyer, Julie Yip Williams. She was a Vietnamese refugee. She was born blind, went to Harvard Law School, and then was diagnosed with a terminal condition. She had 2 young daughters. She blogged for her daughters, knowing that she would soon leave them. She wrote about the paradoxes of life. I don't feel to read the entire quote, but if you care to ask me after, I'll provide the reference. But she illustrates how important paradoxical views can be reconciled, that one is always necessary for the other. May you be the architect of your own lives. May I have the pleasure of sharing my life with you and similar architects. And together, we may touch the purpose of our lives, which is to live fully, to thrive, to flourish. And with that, I commend these thoughts to you.
No questions?
I just thought that would be a great place to end, right? I don't know how long it's been since I've had a standing ovation. Thank you. So generous. 5 or 10 minutes, I'm told. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the existentialists like to claim that suffering is a metaphysical thing. They believe life is metaphysically suffering. How do you challenge that claim from them? And a corollary to that would be, do you think it's possible for someone to answer no to all of your first questions that you studied or talk with?
I can't understand.
Sorry, was I?
I've been to the audiologist twice. She tells me I do not need hearing aids. I missed most of that, and I was paying very.
You were speaking quietly.
Was I?
Talk louder.
I have a lot of people
My
behind
bad.
you.
I was trying not to be too loud. All right. The existentialists like to claim that the suffering is a metaphysical fact of life, and I was essentially asking you what how do you challenge that idea from the existentialists that life is all suffering, and a corollary to that would be, do you think it's possible for someone to answer no to all your first questions that you started your talk with?
I don't know how to answer your question, sir. I love your question. It's it provokes my thoughts. I know that I do not believe suffering is the defining element of our lives. I think that causes to reflect, improve, are enduring. But I would just hearken back to what I've said, that beyond suffering is our ability to thrive and to be happy. And I'm sorry that I can't give you more than that.
Yeah, sure.
Well asked, though. Yes.
Hi, question. Just real quick. Brad Thompson was my professor at Clemson, so I just want to say it was great to hear you mention him. From the illustration of those two men you met out there, in the example of running in the shirts and wanting to acknowledge everyone in the call to action, it seems to me that you're a profoundly benevolent man. And as someone who prides himself as being as benevolent as I can, but also acknowledging I can always be better, I just wanted to ask, this is maybe a boring question, but like tips, advice, or just how would you inculcate that a little bit more? Go ahead.
Live life fully every day and be patient as fullness awaits us. I speak today at age 59 that I could not speak at age 17. I envy your age. I am inspired by your presence. I'm not a boomer who pulls myself with some elevation over you. I just acknowledge that with time and age comes a softening, an invitation to soften. And then part of my job is to sit in judgment. And it is an experience that causes me to think every day throughout the day about how other people perceive me. And so it's not all that great that I love that you're observing this, but it's just something that has been a part of my life. And Mary Elizabeth will tell you I'm not nearly as benevolent as you suggest. But patiently await fullness, striving to be every day the person you want to become.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is about kind of practically finding ways to process trauma. You mentioned in your analysis of your values that you valued your financial stability in your career, but you also need to do this excursion and take this time to experience introspection and to experience discomfort. So my question is, did it cost you deeply in your career or in your financials to do that sort of thing? And if you weren't as well financially situated, would you have still sold the house to go on that sort of excursion and do that sort of thing?
Yeah. So it's very insightful because every choice has consequences. And I'm still an ambitious professional, but through my values work, I've recognized equal or greater endeavors. And so my time away, my time home in the evening has changed a little bit, the opportunities that I have at work. I don't have time. I would tell you a story about how I went to the White House and I interviewed with the president's team, and that just didn't unfold the way that I thought it would. There have been costs, but I act according to those values that I have prioritized. It's undoubtedly cost money, but now I know why I'm spending the money, and what I receive in return is greater than the expense. I don't know how I would answer the question if I was in my 20s and broke again. Right? Mary Elizabeth and I started life eating baked beans on toast, finishing our college educations with lots of school debt. And I don't want to forget those times. And I recognize that my opportunities in my 50s are much different. I would invite you to think, to construct, to design the answers for you that may not be with the resources that I've had.
Thank you.
Yes.
Testing. Okay, all right about there. I just wanted to say right off the bat, thank you for this talk. It was wonderful. And I just wanted to ask you, as somebody who has dealt with many situations that have caused trauma in my life, during my adulthood, I found a partner that has dealt with their own trauma and loved ones that have also dealt with that. In your recommendation, what's the best way to, I guess, help them get on the path of traumatic growth?
It's interesting because I don't know that there is a way for you to fully help another person. Mary Elizabeth and I, it's not a marriage. For me, it's a love story. But yet, I can't force Mary Elizabeth to do anything. Neither can she force me. And so I think beginning with an expectation that you can encourage, suggest, model, but the moment we start importing into others what we expect them to do, I think we shorten the success. I don't know the specifics that you're talking about. I can kind of infer how reading materials, positive suggestions, not criticisms, patience, and patience with yourself and your expectations. The only thing that you can really change is how you react to the external influences in your life, whether you like them or not.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, so I just want to say thank you for your story and for what you've done with your granddaughter. My mom died in an airplane accident when I was younger, and it was my grandmother who took me in, so that I'm sure that will mean a lot to her. So my question is, do you know, what would you say are some significant factors that may lead people to choose maybe some of the less preferred options when facing trauma as opposed to the more preferred options when facing trauma?
Persistent despair, substances. What do people do who don't launch themselves? I mean, they don't do the very things that you and I have attempted to do, and I don't have any specific answer that's coming. I wish I could. You honor me with your story and your question. But each of us have to decide for ourselves. That is our prime directive, to decide for ourselves who we are and what we will do. So similar to the last answer, mentor, model, encourage, and remain focused on you.
Thank you.
But come here, young man. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your story. I wanted to ask you a question because you brought a cold shower as a challenging thing. And I've actually yesterday saw a paper on that sauna is in a long run much better than a cold shower. And with that in mind, I wanted to ask you a question. What do you think, where is the most of growth for your personality, in the good times or in the bad times?
Oh, wow. Well, let me say, I'm not suggesting the cold shower for any health benefits, solely a mind benefit. Where did the most growth come? From our good or bad? Probably bad. Yes, because the good conceals. It's that comfort that is deceptive. It's that gritty, real bad that launches my mind. So I think it's the bad that actually creates the better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, everybody.